Hi, my name is Brianna, and today I will be talking to you about the podcast titled Images of Trans People in Pop Culture, an episode from Intersections, which was published on January 22nd, 2014. In the podcast, Ebony interviews therapist Jason Peterson, who is a trans male, regarding his thoughts and opinions about how the trans community has been represented in films and TV shows. Generally speaking, there has been some positive representation of the transgender community in our pop culture. For example, they talked about the producers of the show Orange is the New Black and how they deliberately casted a trans woman to play the specific transgender role in the show. This not only involved the trans community in the filmmaking process, but it also helped to add depth to the character as well. I think this inclusion and consulting the trans community to accurately represent the transgender characters in the films is very important, because not belonging to that community, you just don't know the full story and how they feel or what they experience in life. However, Jason believes there is far more negative or misrepresentation currently in pop culture. Because of that, he went on to talk about a lot of the criticism the trans community has towards the film industry. First, he talked about how filmmakers tend to focus on the big reveal, which are scenes that are more dramatic when revealing the character is transgender in the film. This is a major misrepresentation because they tend to focus on how our genitals make us what we truly are rather than our gender identity. This goes back to when we discussed the social construction of gender and how our society automatically associates gender with sex, even though our gender identity isn't a biological trait. Later, he went on to talk about how pop culture focuses so much on trans women that they rarely or neglect trans men altogether. In part, this has to do with society's construction of men and how they are meant to be masculine, and generally that can be a big hurdle for trans men to get over in order to be accepted within our society. But a majority of the focus on trans women stems from topics like transphobia and transmisogyny. Laura Kassir explained this best in our textbook on page 395 as the negative attitudes expressed through cultural hate, individual and state violence, a discrimination directed towards trans women and trans and gender non-conforming people on the feminine end of the gender spectrum. Our culture has been very male-oriented for so many years that sexism has become a major form of oppression. However, with the transgender community evolving and gaining a backing in recent years, I think this has led to transferring the focus of sexism from women onto trans people. All in all, I think these problems are associated with the conflict theory because our society is constantly clashing or tearing down inferior individuals to promote those with majority elite status. Unfortunately, the members of the trans community have become the victims of this oppression. Going forward, I think it's important for filmmakers to reanalyze how they approach and include the transgender community in our pop culture. Including a wider variety of trans people when consulting them about their backstories will add depth and better representation to the transgender characters in the films and TV shows. Also, casting more trans actors in the film industry and making more movies that include trans people without focusing on that person necessarily being trans or how they transitioned will all help to reduce or at the very least address the misrepresentation of this minority group. Furthermore, reading the material for this week and listening to the podcast definitely made me recognize issues that I wasn't really aware of before. I'm not too familiar with the transgender community, so I think educating myself is the first step in becoming more aware of what's really going on. Thanks.